Welcome to Law and Disorder. I'm your host, Karen Chohan. This is a place where we review the latest news in politics and reflect on Canadian law. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you're a returning listener, we knew you'd come back. Today are going to focus on an issue that doesn't get celebrity endorsement, the environment. Today we have a very special guest. She is a world-renowned environmental scientist, Regan Roopnarine. Thanks for having me. It's great to see people like yourself publicizing the importance of protecting the world that we live in. Can you tell the viewers what you do for a living? What does a day in Reagan land look like?
Well, half the time I'm studying the effects of climate change on microorganisms, and the other half of the time I'm normally in the office and compiling all that data. But I'm really lucky because in my profession I get to work closely with the Canadian government to help find solutions to major environmental issues. And most of the time, the government sends me and most likely a team to conduct research that supports whatever legislation they're trying to pass.
Wow, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I mean, if you're into biochemistry, it's really a blast.
Well, can you tell us why Canada's natural environment is so significant?
It's significant because it's so incredibly diverse. There's Rocky Mountains, there's prairies, wetlands, especially the water bodies that occupy Canadian territory. I mean, Canada is bordered by literally 3 oceans. We have the Arctic, Pacific, Atlantic. So whatever we dump into those oceans, whether it's intentional or by accident, those effects will have an impact on the world at large. And in addition to that, Canada contains a large portion of the world's fresh water supply.
Yeah, true. A lot of people are not alarmed by the rate of climate change, global warming, and pollution. What motivated you to dedicate your life into saving the planet?
Well, I'm one of the idiots who lives on it.
Well, great answer. I'm just going to get right into the issues now. I really want to focus on 3 major issues that I think are pressing in Canadian society. Firstly, GMOs. Second, CO2 emissions. And then finally, natural resources.
I think that you really hit the nail right on the head there, Kieran, because those are the issues that we're talking about the most in my field right now.
So, firstly, I would like to start off with the whole issue surrounding GMOs. Although Canadians may not realize it with our fully stocked grocery stores, the world is currently in a food crisis. GMOs increase yield by making crops resistant to factors that could otherwise wipe them out, such as pest infestations and climate change. Luckily, the Canadian government understands the need for GMOs and permits them with restrictions that do not prevent the average company from using them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very controversial, but it is true.
Well, in terms of GMOs, I was always shocked that labeling is not mandatory in Canada.
Yeah, so it's Health Canada that's responsible for setting policies regarding food labeling, and it's mandatory for companies to label GMO foods that, and I'm quoting here, that could be mitigated through labeling and highlight a significant nutritional or compositional change, but otherwise no products containing genetically modified ingredients need to explicitly state that. It's almost like in Canada we don't feel the need to inform our citizens about what they put into their bodies. I mean, this raises a lot of ethical issues. According to a survey that was recently done, 90% of Canadians want mandatory GMO labeling. And if we live in a democratic society, which we do, the government should listen to the majority and enact and enforce GMO labeling.
Yeah, I agree with that. For example, the use of animal genes in produce. Recently, fish genes are being inserted into tomato DNA to make it resistant to cold temperatures.
What if eating meat is against your religion, though? You are consuming animal products, whether or not you want to consider them animal products.
Well, I mean, it's not animal meat, it's animal genes, so it's not really going against vegetarian or religious beliefs.
But that depends on the individual. Perhaps if you were a vegetarian.
Which I am.
But shouldn't Canadians be able to decide for themselves whether or not they think that infringes on their beliefs? I mean, they can't do that if they don't know how their food is being produced.
Well, I guess there isn't really a solid argument against labeling. I read the other day that, quote, almost half of all Canadians believe they haven't eaten a GM ingredient, when in actuality they have. This statistic should be alarming to the Canadian government.
So in my opinion, the real reason why GMO foods do not require labeling is because it will decrease sales for major companies. I mean, when people see that a product contains GMOs, despite the fact that, most of them do, they are immediately discouraged from purchasing that product. And companies know this. That's why they go to great lengths not to have labels on their products. I mean, this has become really more of an economic issue, not a health, safety, or ethical issue.
Well, that's the topic switching buzzer. So now I'm going to switch gears here because a lot of Canadians are concerned about carbon dioxide emissions and greenhouse gases.
And they really have a reason to be. Canada needs to put in more effort into enacting laws that will help reduce carbon emissions in order to meet our own goals. The latest UN emission filing shows that we are quite a distance away from meeting the goals and commitments that we made under the Paris Accord.
Yeah, the Globe and Mail reported that Canada is 187 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions away from its Paris commitment. Canada needs to get back on track so we can reduce our emissions to at least 30% than they were in 2005 by 2030.
Luckily, Prime Minister Trudeau recently introduced carbon tax. And for those of you who don't know, essentially what this means is that starting in 2019, it will no longer be free to pollute in Canada. So each province was required to submit their carbon prices by September. In Ontario, where we live, the Ford government introduced a carbon tax of $20 per ton, which will be effective on January 1st.
Which, in my opinion, I think is outrageous.
Oh, really? Why do you say that?
Well, it is hard to calculate the level of cost and how much the tax should be. There's also the possibility of tax evasion, so higher taxes may encourage corporations to hide carbon emissions. And should we be punishing the corporations that employ a large percentage of Canadians, or should we work with them to reduce emissions? Besides, everybody knows that when companies lose money, it comes out of the pockets of working class Canadians.
You know, I think I would disagree on that because I think that the introduction of the carbon tax is both environmentally and economically beneficial. I mean, those that produce mass amounts of CO2 are large corporations that have benefited for far too long off of being able to dispose of gas waste freely into the air that you and I and working class Canadians end up breathing. A permanent carbon tax will force them to make the permanent changes that we need in our society. The money made from the carbon tax will just end up going right back into the provinces, and then this can be used for more climate change initiatives.
Well, Reagan, I want to know, in your professional opinion, what you think the government should be focusing on.
Well, I think that, the three main areas that the government should act upon are emissions from oil, gas, and transportation. Between 2005, I believe, and 2016, upstream oil and gas production emissions rose by 47%, and road transportation was up by 11%.
Well, speaking of things we need to be focusing on, I think we should move on to discussing our last issue regarding water pollution. You mentioned earlier about how Canada borders 3 oceans and contains a large amount of the world's fresh water supply.
Yeah, water is a real topic of concern right now because Canada has international commitments to protect 10% of the area of bordering oceans, but we've only protected less than 2%. In many regions, point source pollution, including wastewater effluents, industrial discharges, and urban runoff, are the largest contributors to this problem, while agricultural contamination, including nitrogen, phosphorus, and pesticides, dominates in the prairies and in southwestern Ontario. 2 other major sources are pipeline incidents and pollution from transportation mishaps, and those 2 factors mainly account for why the zone of very high stress reaches up into northern Alberta.
Also, in addition to habitat loss, structures such as dams, roads, and railways serve to divide freshwater ecosystems, and they impede on migration of fish and other species, and they also alter the flow of nutrients. If things continue as they are, freshwater ecosystems are likely to face unprecedented change, while Canadians are left in the dark about what is happening to their country's most important resource. So now we're going to open the debate to the viewers. Call us at 416-555-6765 to ask Reagan or myself any pressing questions you may have. Oh, we have a caller. Hi, what is your name and where are you from?
Hi there, my name is Mackenzie. I'm from Victoria, BC, and I'm originally from Australia.
Hi, Mackenzie. Thanks for calling. What's your question?
Well, recently in BC, where I live, there has been a lot of talk about the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. I want to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll let Reagan handle this one since she works a lot with the government.
That's a really heated issue, Mackenzie. Thanks for bringing it up. So my team investigated into the effects of this pipeline, and we found that if the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion proceeds and an oil spill was to occur, It is estimated that it would affect, I think it was between 22 and 80% of the whale's critical Salish Sea habitat. They already face severe Chinook salmon prey shortages and other challenges. Do you think that the British Columbia government will approve of the pipeline? Well, BC's new government will argue in this case against the Kinder Morgan pipeline because the federal government failed to evaluate the project's risk to the marine environment, which is a breach of its obligation to consider the national interest.
But do you know if there is currently any technology that could help clean up a spill if one were to happen?
Not currently. There's no technology that will adequately clean most spills. Right now, we can't tell whether or not the government will put the pipeline into effect. It definitely will cause major environmental problems in the event of a spill. However, this is a great opportunity for the economy.
Definitely, I totally agree with that.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, Mackenzie.
No, thank you for taking my call.
Well, as we're wrapping up here, each show I always take the opportunity to inform our viewers about their charter rights.
You know, when it comes to environmental issues, they really don't have any. Environmental rights are not ingrained in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which places greater importance on the environmental statutes that we have in Canada. Ultimately, the goal for environmental scientists and advocates across Canada, like myself, is to convince the government that the right to clean air and clean water is pressing enough to be included in the Constitution.
So, if there are any listeners that want to take action and get our government officials to add that important feature, what can they do?
Well, they can go online to my website, which is www.greenthecharter.org, to support campaigns and youth rallies.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Reagan, for being here. It was very exciting having you on the show to share your professional outlooks on the environment. Those of you who are listening, make sure to visit Reagan's website and tune in next week because we will be interviewing Canada's top marijuana distributor, Bob Hardy from Weed to Go. And that is my final verdict of the day. Case dismissed.
Sponsored by Baines's Candy Canes, gluten-free holiday fun.